Amy Winters sat at her desk, tapping her pen against a stack of papers. The office around her buzzed with activity as staff members rushed back and forth, phones rang nonstop, and printers hummed in the background. As the press secretary for Senator Patricia Coleman, Amy was used to busy days, but today felt different. She had just ended a call that could change everything. "You want me to go on the night show?" Amy had asked, certain she had misheard the producer on the other end of the line. "Yes, Ms. Winters. Greg Morrison specifically requested you after seeing your press conference last week. He was impressed by how you handled those tough questions about the music industry regulation bill." Now, staring at her computer screen, Amy wondered if accepting the invitation was a mistake. The Night Show with Greg Morrison wasn't just any television program. It was the most watched late-night talk show in America with millions of viewers every night. One appearance could make or break careers. Amy had seen it happen before. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Nancy Peters. "Did you really get invited to the Night Show? The whole office is talking about it." Before Amy could reply, her office door swung open. Senator Patricia Coleman walked in with her characteristic confident stride. At 55, the senator carried herself with the assurance of someone who had fought and won many political battles. "So my press secretary is about to become a television star," Patricia said with a smile, sitting down across from Amy. "I'm not sure I should do it," Amy admitted. "I'm comfortable handling press conferences and written statements, but live television with Greg Morrison? He's known for putting guests on the spot." Patricia leaned forward. "That's exactly why you should do it. Our music industry regulation bill needs public support. This is a perfect opportunity to explain why these reforms matter. Besides, I've seen you handle tougher rooms than Greg's studio." Amy sighed. "What if I mess up? What if I say something wrong and it hurts the campaign?" "You won't," Patricia said firmly. "You know this bill better than anyone. You understand why we need to stop these music executives from exploiting young artists. This is your chance to bring that message to millions of people." After the senator left, Amy called the producer back and confirmed her appearance for Friday night, just 3 days away. As soon as she hung up, her stomach tightened with anxiety. She opened her laptop and began researching Greg Morrison's interviewing style, watching clips of his previous shows until late in the evening. The next morning, Amy arrived at the office earlier than usual. She had barely slept, her mind racing with all the ways her television appearance could go wrong. She was so distracted that she almost missed the plain brown package sitting on her desk with no return address. Amy looked around. The office was nearly empty this early. She carefully opened the package, half expecting it to be hate mail related to the senator's controversial bill. Instead, she found a USB drive and a handwritten note that simply said, "You might need this for your night show appearance," from someone who knows the truth. Her first instinct was to call security, but curiosity got the better of her. She plugged the USB drive into her computer and found dozens of files, financial records, emails, and contracts from 2 of the biggest names in the music industry, Frank Carter and Richard Jones. As she skimmed through the documents, her eyes widened. These weren't just ordinary business records. They revealed a pattern of exploitative contracts, tax evasion schemes, and evidence that both men had been systematically cheating artists out of royalties for years. Amy quickly removed the USB drive and locked it in her desk drawer. Who had sent this? And how did they know about her upcoming television appearance? The information was explosive, possibly illegal to have been obtained, but if true, it confirmed everything Senator Coleman had been fighting against. Her phone rang, startling her. It was an unknown number. "Hello, Amy Winters speaking." She answered cautiously. "Ms. Winters," a deep voice responded. "I hope you received my package." "Who is this?" Amy demanded, her heart racing. "That doesn't matter. What matters is what you do with that information. I worked for Carter and Jones for 15 years. I've seen firsthand what they do to young artists. Your senator is right about the industry needing regulation, but she doesn't know how deep the corruption goes. Why give this to me? Why not? Go to the police." The man laughed bitterly. "These men own judges, politicians, even some police departments. No one will touch them. But public opinion? That's something they can't fully control. You have a platform on Friday night. Use it. Before Amy could ask more questions, the caller hung up. She sat frozen, staring at her phone. The mysterious caller was asking her to use her appearance on the night show to expose Frank Carter and Richard Jones. It could be career suicide. It could also be the push their bill needed to pass. Throughout the day, Amy couldn't focus on her regular tasks. She kept thinking about the documents on the USB drive. During her lunch break, she did some research on her personal phone about Frank Carter and Richard Jones. Both men were music industry legends who had discovered some of the biggest stars of the past 20 years. They were powerful, wealthy, and reportedly ruthless in business dealings. That evening, instead of going home, Amy stayed at the office after everyone left. She carefully went through every file on the USB drive, taking notes and verifying what information she could through public records. The more she discovered, the more disturbed she became. If these documents were authentic, Carter and Jones had built their empire on exploitation and fraud. As she was about to leave around midnight, her phone rang again. It was the same unknown number. "Did you look at everything?" the voice asked, without introduction. "Yes," Amy replied. "But I can't just go on national television and accuse two powerful men based on anonymous documents. I could get sued. The senator could get sued." "Check your email," the voice said. Amy opened her email on her computer and found a new message with a video attachment. The video showed the caller, a middle-aged man in a dimly lit room, holding up his ID badge from Carter Records. "My name is Peter Wilson. I was the financial controller for Carter Records for 12 years and worked closely with Richard Jones's companies as well. Those documents came from my personal files, copied over years as insurance. I'm willing to go on record, but only after someone else breaks the story. They'll destroy me if I'm the first one to speak out." Amy watched the rest of the video, in which Peter explained specific details about each document, where it came from, and how it connected to the larger scheme of artist exploitation. "Why me?" Amy asked when he finished. "Because your senator has been the only one brave enough to challenge them, and because you don't seem like someone who scares easily." After the call ended, Amy stayed at her desk for another hour thinking. She now had evidence of potentially criminal activity by two of the most powerful men in the music industry. She also had a primetime television slot in 2 days. The question was, what would she do with it? The next day, Amy avoided mentioning the USB drive or the calls to anyone, even Senator Coleman. She went through her preparations for the night show appearance, reviewing talking points about the music industry regulation bill. But her mind kept returning to the documents and Peter Wilson's plea. That night, she barely slept again. By morning, the day of her appearance, Amy had made her decision. She carefully selected several key documents from the USB drive, made copies, and placed them in a folder in her briefcase. She didn't know if she would use them. She didn't know if she would have the courage when the moment came. But she would be prepared just in case. As her car arrived to take her to the studio, Amy received one final text from the unknown number. "Remember, sometimes the truth needs a spotlight to be seen. Good luck tonight." Amy took a deep breath, smoothed down her blazer, and stepped into the car. Whatever happened on the night show tonight, she knew her life would never be the same afterward. The car pulled up to the back entrance of the night show studio. Amy clutched her briefcase tightly as a production assistant with a clipboard and a headset greeted her. "Ms. Winters, I'm Olivia. Welcome to the night show. We're so excited to have you." The young woman spoke quickly, leading Amy through a maze of hallways. "We'll get you to hair and makeup first, then a quick pre-interview with our segment producer, and you'll be on stage with Greg before you know it." Amy nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. The studio was much bigger than it looked on television. Crew members rushed around with equipment, and monitors displayed various camera angles of the empty stage. The famous blue and silver set glowed under bright lights. In the makeup room, a stylist named Kevin worked on Amy's hair while a makeup artist named Bella applied foundation. "Nervous?" Kevin asked, noticing Amy's tense shoulders. "Is it that obvious?" Amy managed a weak smile. "Everyone, Is their first time, Bella assured her. Even the movie stars, but Greg is wonderful with guests. Just be yourself and you'll do great. As they finished her makeup, Amy heard a knock at the door. A tall man with a clipboard entered. Ms. Winters, I'm Dan, the segment producer. We have about 15 minutes before you're on. I wanted to go over the flow of the interview with you. Amy listened as Dan explained how Greg would introduce her, the main topics they would cover, and how long the segment would last. He never mentioned anything about Frank Carter or Richard Jones, which confirmed her suspicion that no one at the show knew about the documents in her briefcase. Any questions? Dan asked. Will there be other guests tonight? Amy asked casually. Yes, actually. We have a last-minute addition. Frank Carter and Richard Jones will be on after you to talk about their new music streaming platform. Amy nearly dropped her water bottle. Frank Carter and Richard Jones? Here? Tonight? Dan nodded, looking at his clipboard. Lucky timing, right? Since your senator's bill directly affects their business. But don't worry, you won't be on stage together. They'll come on after your segment. After Dan left, Amy sat alone in the green room, her mind racing. This couldn't be a coincidence. Carter and Jones must have heard about her appearance and arranged to be on the show to counter anything she might say about the regulation bill. They couldn't possibly know about the documents. She had, could they? A small TV in the corner showed the live broadcast. Greg Morrison was finishing his opening monologue, making jokes about recent political events. The audience laughed loudly at each punchline. Soon, that same audience would be watching her. Amy's phone buzzed with a text from Senator Coleman. You'll be amazing. Remember why we're fighting this fight. Before Amy could reply, the door opened again. Olivia, the production assistant, was back. We're ready for you, Ms. Winters. Please follow me. Amy stood, smoothing her navy blue blazer. She left her briefcase in the green room but slipped a few key documents into the inner pocket of her jacket. As she followed Olivia through the backstage area, she suddenly froze. Through an open door, she caught a glimpse of two men in expensive suits talking with producers. Frank Carter, with his trademark silver hair and tan, and Richard Jones, younger and always dressed in black. They hadn't noticed her. Ms. Winters, are you okay? Olivia asked. Amy nodded and kept walking. Now she knew for certain. They were here to protect their interests. The question was, would she risk everything to expose them? You'll wait here until Greg introduces you, Olivia explained, positioning Amy at the edge of the stage. Then just walk out, shake Greg's hand, and take a seat on the couch. Amy could hear Greg's voice booming through the studio. My next guest is the press secretary for Senator Patricia Coleman, who's been making waves with a controversial new bill to regulate the music industry. Please welcome Amy Winters. The audience applauded and Amy walked onto the brightly lit stage. The lights were blinding, and there were far more people in the audience than she had imagined. Greg Morrison stood to greet her, his famous smile, exactly as it appeared on television. He was taller in person and his handshake was firm and reassuring. Welcome to the show, Amy, Greg said as they both sat down. I appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you for having me, Amy replied, surprised that her voice sounded steady despite her nerves. So, you work for Senator Coleman, who's been making headlines with her music industry regulation bill. Can you tell us what this bill is all about? This was familiar territory. Amy had discussed the bill in dozens of press conferences and interviews. She explained how the legislation would protect young artists from exploitative contracts, ensure fair royalty payments, and create more transparency in the industry. That all sounds very reasonable, Greg said. So why is there so much opposition? Change is always difficult, especially when it affects an industry that's operated a certain way for decades. Amy replied diplomatically. Some executives are concerned about how these new regulations might impact their business models. Speaking of executives, Greg said, glancing at his note cards, I understand Frank Carter and Richard Jones have been particularly vocal opponents of this bill. They've called it unnecessary government interference and damaging to artist discovery. How do you respond to that? From the corner of her eye, Amy could see a monitor showing Carter and Jones watching from the green room. They were smiling confidently. They thought they had the upper hand. In that moment, Amy made her decision. "Well, Greg, it's interesting you should mention Frank Carter and Richard Jones." Amy shifted in her seat, her hand moving toward the documents in her jacket. "Their opposition to this bill might make more sense when you understand how they've been operating their businesses." Greg raised an eyebrow, sensing a shift in the conversation. "What do you mean by that?" "Let me give you an example," Amy said, pulling out the first document. "This is a standard contract from Carter Records for new artists. Look at Section 12B. She handed the paper to Greg, who looked surprised but took it and read where she pointed. This clause essentially gives the label ownership of not just the music but the artist's name, image, and even social media accounts for life, even if the artist leaves the label. Greg's eyes widened as he read. "This can't be legal, can it?" "It exists in a legal gray area," Amy explained. "And it's just the beginning." She pulled out another document. "This is an internal memo from Richard Jones Entertainment regarding royalty calculations for streaming payments." The studio had gone completely quiet. The audience was leaning forward in their seats. On the monitor, Amy could see Carter and Jones were no longer smiling. They were frantically whispering to each other. The memo instructs accountants to use what they call adjusted streaming counts when calculating artist payments. In simple terms, they're deliberately undercounting streams to pay artists less than they've earned. Greg looked genuinely shocked. "These are serious allegations. How did you get these documents?" "From someone who worked inside these companies for years and couldn't stay silent anymore," Amy said. "And there's more." For the next 5 minutes, Amy methodically went through the evidence, explaining each document in simple terms that both Greg and the audience could understand. She wasn't just making accusations, she was presenting facts, figures, and direct quotes from the company's own records. What surprised everyone, including Amy herself, was how she delivered this information. Instead of being stern or angry, she found herself pointing out the absurdity of some of the schemes with wry observations that made the audience laugh. "Look at this expense report," she said, showing another document. "Frank Carter charged his label $200,000 for artist development for a band that never released a single song. Meanwhile, the actual artists who made hit records couldn't get the label to pay for studio time. It's like hiring a contractor to build your house, and they use your money to buy themselves a yacht instead." The audience roared with laughter, and even Greg chuckled. Amy had found her rhythm. The nervous press secretary was gone, replaced by someone confident and surprisingly funny. "And here's my personal favorite," Amy continued, holding up another paper. "Richard Jones's company created seven shell companies to hide royalty payments. They named them after his pet dogs. The money would pass through all 7 companies before reaching the artists, with fees taken out at each step. By the time artists got paid, they were receiving pennies on the dollar." As the audience gasped and laughed, the monitor showed Carter and Jones in heated arguments with the producers backstage. Amy knew she had just changed everything: her career, the fate of the bill, and perhaps the music industry itself. There was no going back now. The studio erupted in a mix of gasps, laughter, and applause as Amy continued her unexpected exposé. Greg Morrison, usually the one in control of his show, sat back in his chair with a look of amazement on his face. This was live television gold, unpredictable, authentic, and absolutely riveting. "Amy," Greg said, leaning forward, "these are some serious claims you're making. Are you concerned about potential legal consequences?" Amy smiled. "I'm only sharing factual information from documented sources. Truth is the ultimate defense." She paused before adding, "Besides, I think Frank and Richard should be more concerned about legal consequences than I am." The audience broke into applause again. Behind the cameras, producers were frantically signaling to Greg. The show was supposed to go to commercial break 3 minutes ago, but no one wanted to cut away from what was happening. On the backstage monitor, Frank Carter's face had turned, an alarming shade of red. He was shouting at a producer while Richard Jones was frantically typing on his phone, likely calling their lawyers. Dan, the segment producer who had briefed Amy earlier, was now standing at the edge of the stage with a look of both panic and excitement. "Let's talk about artist contracts," Amy continued, pulling out another document from her jacket pocket. This one is particularly interesting. It shows how new artists are forced to pay for their own music videos, promotional costs, and even tour expenses. But the label keeps ownership of everything. It's like making someone buy a house, but then telling them they can only rent it back from you. She delivered the line with such perfect comedic timing that the audience roared with laughter. Greg couldn't help but laugh too. "Where did you learn to be so funny?" Greg asked, genuinely curious. "When you work in politics, you develop a sense of humor or you lose your mind," Amy replied, earning another laugh. "Besides, some of these business practices are so ridiculous that you can't help but laugh at the absurdity." A production assistant rushed onto the stage and handed Greg a note. He read it quickly, his eyebrows rising. "Well, this is interesting," Greg said, looking up. "It seems our next guests, Frank Carter and Richard Jones, are requesting equal time to respond to these allegations." He turned to Amy. "Would you be willing to stay for that conversation?" The audience began chanting, "Stay, stay, stay." Amy took a deep breath. This wasn't part of the plan. She had expected to make her revelations and leave. Facing Carter and Jones directly on national television was a much bigger risk, but backing down now would undermine everything she'd just accomplished. "I'd be happy to stay," Amy said. Her voice steady despite her racing heart. Greg's face lit up. "Excellent, we'll take a quick commercial break and be right back with what I'm sure will be a fascinating conversation." As soon as the on-air lights dimmed, the stage erupted in activity. Makeup artists rushed to touch up both Amy and Greg's appearance. Dan hurried over to Amy. "That was unexpected," he said, his voice a mix of awe and anxiety. "Are you sure you want to stay? Carter and Jones are furious." "Good," Amy replied. "Let them be furious on national television. It'll only make them look worse." Dan looked at her with newfound respect. "The network lawyers are reviewing what you've said so far. They say as long as you stick to documented facts, we're on solid ground." Meanwhile, across the stage, Greg was in an intense discussion with the show's executive producer. They kept looking over at Amy and nodding. A production assistant appeared at Amy's side with a bottle of water. "2 minutes until we're back on air," she said. Amy took a sip of water and steadied herself. In the wings of the stage, she could see Frank Carter and Richard Jones being fitted with microphones. Frank was still red-faced, while Richard had adopted a calm, almost smug expression. She recognized that look from years in politics. It was the face of someone who thought they had an ace up their sleeve. 30 seconds, called the floor director. Greg returned to his seat beside Amy. "This is going to be quite a show," he whispered. "Just so you know, I've told the crew to cut mics if things get too heated or if Carter and Jones try to bully you." Amy nodded gratefully as the countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2. The floor director pointed silently as the on-air lights illuminated again. "Welcome back to the night show," Greg said smoothly. "If you're just joining us, we've been having a fascinating conversation with Amy Winters, press secretary for Senator Patricia Coleman, about proposed regulations for the music industry. Amy has shared some rather surprising documents regarding business practices at major labels. Now, we're joined by two of the industry's biggest names, who I'm sure have some thoughts on what we've discussed. Please welcome Frank Carter and Richard Jones." The audience applauded politely as the two men walked onto the stage. Frank Carter, in his 60s with perfectly styled silver hair and an expensive blue suit, had composed himself somewhat, but still looked tense. Richard Jones, about 15 years younger with a black turtleneck under his designer jacket, wore a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. They shook Greg's hand and then, after a moment's hesitation, Amy's as well. 2 additional chairs had been brought out, creating a small semicircle around Greg's desk. "Gentlemen, thank you for joining us," Greg said. "I understand you wanted to respond to some of the points Amy has raised." Frank leaned forward. "Absolutely. First, I want to say that what we've heard tonight is a gross mischaracterization of how the music industry operates. These documents, which I haven't seen personally, are clearly taken out of context. Would you like to see them?" Amy asked sweetly, holding out the papers. "They're right here." The audience laughed as Frank blinked in surprise. "The point is," Frank continued, ignoring Amy's offer, Running a music label is a high-risk business. For every successful artist, we invest in dozens who never make it. Those costs have to be recouped somehow. By charging successful artists for the failures of others? Amy asked. That's not mentioned anywhere in their contracts. Richard Jones jumped in with a smoother approach. What Frank is trying to say is that there are complex business realities in our industry that might look questionable when viewed by outsiders without context. The contracts our artists sign are standard for the industry and reviewed by their lawyers. That's interesting, Amy said, pulling out another document. Because according to this email from your legal department, you specifically target young artists who can't afford experienced music lawyers, and you pressure them to sign quickly before they can get proper legal advice. The audience gasped. Richard's smooth facade cracked slightly. That email is private company correspondence, he said coldly. How did you obtain it? The same way I obtained the memo where you instructed your team to create fake streaming accounts, to artificially inflate numbers for certain artists while using those same fake accounts to justify underpaying others, Amy replied. From someone inside your organization who was tired of watching young artists get exploited. Frank slammed his hand on the armrest of his chair. This is ridiculous. We're being ambushed here with stolen documents and out-of-context snippets. Amy remained calm. Is this out of context? She asked, holding up another paper. Your own. Accounting department calculated that over the past 5 years, your artists were underpaid by approximately $42 million in streaming royalties, money that went directly into company accounts and, according to this breakdown, funded your personal expenses, including, she paused for effect, a private island in the Bahamas that you named Artist Development. The audience erupted in laughter and Frank's face turned red again. You think this is funny? Frank snapped at the audience. You have no idea how this business works, Greg intervened smoothly. Frank, Richard, would you like to address these specific allegations? Are these documents authentic? Richard leaned back, attempting to regain his composure. Without seeing the full context, I can't comment on cherry-picked information. What I can say is that our company has launched the careers of some of the biggest artists in the world. They wouldn't work with us if we were as terrible as Ms. Winter suggests. Actually, Amy countered, according to this list, 17 major artists have tried to leave your labels in the past decade, but couldn't because of the contract terms we discussed earlier. 3 of them had to declare bankruptcy because of the legal fees from fighting you in court. As the hour progressed, the dynamic became clear to everyone watching. Every time Frank or Richard tried to dismiss Amy's claims, she produced another document that directly contradicted them. When they attempted to intimidate her with legal threats, she responded with wit and poise that made them look foolish. What had started as a standard talk show segment had transformed into one of the most remarkable moments in television history. Social media was exploding with clips from the show, and news networks had begun interrupting their regular programming to report on what was happening live on the night show. Greg Morrison glanced at the clock. What was supposed to be a 15-minute segment had now stretched to nearly an hour. The show's producers were frantically rearranging the schedule, canceling other planned guests to let this unprecedented confrontation continue. No one wanted to cut away from what was quickly becoming the most talked-about television moment of the year. We need to take another quick break, Greg announced. But don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of this fascinating conversation. As soon as the cameras stopped rolling, Frank Carter jumped to his feet. This is over, he declared, pulling off his microphone. I won't be part of this ambush any longer. Greg stood up quickly. Frank, think about how this will look if you walk off now. The damage is already done. At least stay and defend yourself. Richard. Jones remained seated, his face a mask of calculation. Frank, he said quietly. Greg is right. Walking off makes us look guilty. Frank hesitated, then reluctantly sat back down, shooting a venomous look at Amy. You have no idea what you've started, he said to her in a low voice. Amy met his gaze calmly. I know exactly what I've started. The question is whether you know what you've been doing to these artists all these years. During the break, Amy checked her phone. It was exploding with notifications. Senator Coleman had texted, I'm watching. This is incredible. The office is going crazy. Be careful, but keep going. There were also dozens of messages from unknown numbers, artists, producers, and industry insiders who had somehow gotten her contact information and were sending their support or offering more information. One message caught her eye. "This is Peter Wilson. You're doing great. I'm ready to go public now. Call me after the show." The floor director counted down again and they were back live. "Welcome back to what has become a special extended edition of The Night Show," Greg said. "For those just tuning in, we're in the middle of an extraordinary conversation about music industry practices with Press Secretary Amy Winters and music executives Frank Carter and Richard Jones." Greg turned to the executives. "Gentlemen, during the break, our producers received some interesting information. It seems several artists signed to your labels are watching tonight and have reached out to us. They're offering to come on the show to share their experiences. Would you care to comment on that?" Frank's eyes widened in alarm. Richard maintained his composure but gripped the armrest of his chair tightly. "I think we've heard enough unsubstantiated claims tonight," Richard said smoothly. "Adding more voices without proper fact-checking would be irresponsible journalism. That's rich coming from someone whose company has a department dedicated to planting fake stories about artists who speak out," Amy said, pulling yet another document from her seemingly endless supply. "This email from your PR team discusses, and I quote, standard character assassination protocols for non-compliant talent." The audience gasped. "You're taking that completely out of context," Frank exploded. "That refers to crisis management for artists who get themselves into trouble." Amy raised an eyebrow. "Is that why the next paragraph specifically mentions creating fake social media accounts to spread rumors about artists who try to leave the label? That's an interesting definition of crisis management." Greg looked genuinely shocked. "Is that true? You create fake scandals about your own artists?" "Of course not," Richard said quickly. "As Frank mentioned, these snippets are being taken out of context." "Then let me provide more context," Amy replied. She pulled out a folder and handed it to Greg. "These are screenshots of social media posts attacking singer Lily Martinez last year when she tried to leave Carter Records. And here are the internal emails showing how your team created those posts, including instructions to make them seem like they came from different people." Greg looked through the folder, his expression growing more troubled. "This is disturbing." "It gets worse," Amy continued. "When Lily Martinez suffered a mental health crisis after this smear campaign, your company used it as leverage to force her to sign a new contract with even worse terms." Richard leaned forward. "Ms. Winters, you're dancing on the edge of slander here. These are serious accusations without proper—" "I have the receipts," Amy interrupted, her voice steady. "Every statement I've made tonight is backed by documentation. But you know what? I don't think the audience needs to hear it from me anymore." She turned to Greg. "I think it's time to hear from the artists themselves, don't you?" Greg nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "As a matter of fact, we have someone waiting backstage right now. Please welcome platinum-selling artist Jack Hudson." The audience erupted in cheers as Jack Hudson, one of the biggest pop stars of the past decade, walked onto the stage. Frank and Richard froze in visible shock. Jack had been one of their biggest moneymakers for years. Jack shook hands with Greg and Amy, then deliberately turned his back on Frank and Richard as he took a seat. "Jack, thank you for joining us on such short notice," Greg said. "You've been watching tonight's show?" "Yes, and I decided I couldn't stay silent any longer," Jack replied. His normally confident voice shook slightly. "Everything Amy has said is true. I've lived it for the past 8 years." "You're one of the most successful artists in the world," Greg noted. "Are you saying even you've been affected by these practices?" Jack nodded. "Success doesn't protect you. In some ways, it makes it worse. The more money you make for them, the more creative ways they find to keep it from you." He turned to face Frank and Richard directly. "I signed with you when I was 19. You promised me the world. What you didn't tell me was that I'd be paying for that world 3 times over while you kept most of the profits." "Jack," Frank said, his tone suddenly conciliatory, "we've always had a good relationship. If there were issues with your contract, You should have come to us directly instead of airing grievances on television. Jack laughed bitterly. I did come to you, repeatedly. For years. You always said the same thing. That's just how the industry works. Well, maybe it's time the industry worked differently. As Jack continued to share his experiences, Amy watched the faces of Frank and Richard. Their expressions had changed from anger to something closer to fear. They were losing control of the narrative completely. And I'm not alone, Jack was saying. I've been on the phone during the commercial breaks. Other artists are willing to speak out now, too. The dam has broken. Right on cue, Greg's producer appeared at the edge of the stage holding up a phone. Greg nodded. It seems we have another artist who wants to join the conversation, Greg announced. Sophia Lee is calling in live. Sophia Lee's voice filled the studio. I'm watching this from Tokyo, where I'm on tour, and I just want to say thank you to Amy Winters for having the courage to expose what's been happening. I've been afraid to speak up for years because of the character assassination protocols. She mentioned. They threatened to release private photos of me when I complained about not receiving royalties for my songs being used in commercials. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sophia, that's simply not... Save it, Richard, Sophia interrupted. I have the emails. Your head of legal sent them to my manager. You specifically threatened to make sure she never works in this industry again if I didn't drop the royalty issue. As the show continued, more artists called in or sent messages that Greg read aloud. Each one corroborated Amy's claims and added new details about their own experiences. The studio audience reacted with gasps, boos directed at Frank and Richard, and applause for Amy and the artists. Frank Carter had gone from red-faced anger to ashen defeat. Richard Jones maintained his composure but was noticeably sweating. The power dynamic had shifted completely. During the next commercial break, Richard's phone rang. He stepped away to answer it, then returned with a grim expression. That was our board of directors, he said quietly to Frank. They're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Frank nodded numbly. Mine too. Amy overheard their exchange and caught Greg's eye. They shared a look of understanding. The tide had turned irrevocably. When they returned from the break, Frank and Richard had a new strategy. They began distancing themselves from the practices being described, suggesting they weren't aware of the specific tactics used by their legal and accounting departments. So you're saying you didn't know what was happening in your own companies? Amy asked innocently. That seems concerning for men who pride themselves on being hands-on executives. The audience laughed, and even Jack Hudson cracked a smile. Or, perhaps, Amy continued, you knew exactly what was happening because you designed these systems yourselves. She held up one final document. This email chain from 7 years ago shows both of you personally approving what you called the royalty reduction strategy. You even congratulated each other on how much money it would save the companies and add to your personal bonuses, Frank. Carter stood up abruptly. This interview is over, he declared, and walked off the stage. This time Richard followed him without hesitation. The audience booed as they left, then broke into thunderous applause for Amy. The next morning, Amy woke up in her apartment to the sound of her phone ringing nonstop. She had turned it off around 2 a.m. after hundreds of calls, texts, and social media notifications had made sleep impossible. Now, as she reached for it, with bleary eyes, she saw that the situation had only intensified. Missed calls from every major news network, text messages from colleagues, friends, and family, emails from journalists requesting interviews, and a special message from Senator Coleman. My office, 9 a.m., we have much to discuss. You're a hero. Amy made coffee and turned on her television. Every channel was talking about last night's show. On the screen, clips of her confrontation with Frank Carter and Richard Jones played on a loop. Headlines scrolled across the bottom. Music industry shaken by live TV expose, and Carter and Jones stocks plummet as artists speak out. One news anchor was saying, what began as a routine talk show appearance has sparked what industry insiders are calling the Great Music Revolution. Press Secretary Amy Winters, previously unknown to most Americans, has become an overnight sensation with her witty takedown of two of the most powerful men in entertainment. Amy's phone rang again. This time it was Peter Wilson, the whistleblower who had provided her with the documents. "You did it," Peter said when she answered. "I watched the whole thing. I never imagined it would work so well." "Neither did I," Amy admitted. "I was terrified the whole time." "It didn't show," Peter said. "You looked like you were enjoying yourself." Amy smiled. "I think I was by the end. What happens now?" "Now I go public as the source," Peter said. "I have a meeting with federal investigators this afternoon. They want to look into potential fraud charges against Carter and Jones, and I'm not the only one coming forward. Former employees from both companies are speaking up. It's like a dam breaking." After saying goodbye to Peter, Amy showered and dressed for her meeting with Senator Coleman. As she stepped outside her apartment building, she was surprised to find a small crowd of reporters waiting. "Ms. Winters, how does it feel to take down two music industry giants? Amy, will you be working with the artists on new legislation?" "Did. You know your appearance has become the most watched clip in talk show history." Amy smiled politely but kept walking. "I'll be making a statement later today. Thank you for your interest." At Senator Coleman's office, the mood was jubilant. Staff, members applauded as Amy walked in. The senator was waiting in her office with a broad smile. "Amy," Senator Coleman said, embracing her, "what you did last night was extraordinary. You've done more for our cause in 1 hour than we've accomplished in a year of hearings and press releases." "I was just doing my job," Amy said modestly. "No, you did much more than that," the senator replied. "You gave a voice to people who have been silenced for decades, and you did it with style." The senator gestured to her computer, which showed a social media page. "Have you seen the memes? There are thousands of them. Your facial expressions when Carter and Jones were trying to defend themselves have become internet gold." Amy laughed as she looked at the screen. Someone had captured the moment when she had raised a single eyebrow at one of Frank's more outrageous claims and turned it into a viral sensation. The music industry regulation bill now has 50 new co-sponsors. In Congress, the senator continued. "Representatives who wouldn't even take my calls last week are suddenly passionate about artist rights. Your appearance changed everything." As they discussed next steps, Amy's phone buzzed with a news alert. She checked it and gasped. "Frank Carter has resigned as CEO of Carter Records," she read aloud. "The board of directors has announced an internal investigation into business practices and promises full cooperation with federal authorities." Senator Coleman smiled. "The first domino falls. Richard Jones won't be far behind." She was right. By lunchtime, Richard Jones had also stepped down from his position. Both companies released similar statements promising reform and better treatment of artists. But the biggest surprise came that afternoon. Amy was preparing for a press conference when she received a call from Greg Morrison. "Amy, you've started a revolution," Greg said. "I've been in television for 20 years and I've never seen anything like what happened last night. Our viewership broke all records. But that's not why I'm calling." "Oh?" Amy asked. "I have a proposal for you," Greg said. "How would you feel about hosting a special series on The Night Show? We want to give artists a platform to share their stories and discuss the changes needed in the industry. You were so natural on camera, and the audience loved you." Amy was speechless. "But I'm a press secretary, not a television host," she finally managed. "You're whatever you want to be," Greg replied. "And right now, you're the person that artists trust to tell their stories. Just think about it." After ending the call with Greg, Amy headed to the press conference where Senator Coleman announced new, stronger provisions to the Music Industry Regulation Bill, now renamed the Fair Artist Treatment Act. At the senator's invitation, Amy took the podium to speak. 24 hours ago, I was just a press secretary doing my job," Amy began. "Today I stand before you amazed at how quickly truth can change the world when given a platform." Cameras flashed as she continued. "This isn't about me. This is about countless artists who have been silenced and exploited. This is about future generations of musicians who deserve better. And this is about consumers who deserve to know that the artists they love are being treated fairly." The press conference was broadcast live on every major network. As Amy spoke, text messages flooded in from artists around the country, thanking her and offering support. 1 week later, Amy sat in a congressional hearing room next to Senator Coleman. Across from them were dozens of artists, former music executives, including Peter Wilson and industry experts. They were testifying in support of the Fair Artist Treatment Act, which was now on a fast track to passage. During a break in the proceedings, Amy stepped into the hallway to find Jack Hudson waiting for her. "I wanted to thank you in person," Jack said. "What you did took incredible courage." "So did your decision to speak out," Amy replied. "You risked your career." Jack smiled. "Actually, my career is better than ever. I've started my own independent label with several other artists. We're creating a new model: fair contracts, transparent accounting, and artist ownership of their work. We're calling it Revolution Records." "That's wonderful," Amy said. "We want you to be part of it," Jack continued. "Not as an employee, but as an advisor. We need someone who understands both the political and public relations aspects of what we're trying to do." Before Amy could respond, her phone rang. It was Greg Morrison again, following up on his offer. As she looked at the phone, Amy realized her life had completely transformed in just a few days. From behind-the-scenes press secretary to public figure with multiple career opportunities, all because she had chosen to speak truth to power when given the chance. 1 month later, Amy sat in the Oval Office watching the president sign the Fair Artist Treatment Act into law. Senator Coleman stood proudly beside the president, while Amy was surrounded by artists whose lives would be changed by this legislation. That evening, Amy made her debut as the host of Revolution Music Industry Reform, a special series on Sci-Fi, The Night Show. Her first guests were 3 young artists who had recently signed groundbreaking contracts with Jack Hudson's new label. As the cameras rolled, Amy looked directly into the lens. "Welcome to a new era in music. An era of transparency, fairness, and respect for creativity. Tonight we'll hear from artists who are building the future they want to see." The audience applauded wildly. Amy Winters, once an unknown press secretary, had found her voice, and in doing so had helped countless others find theirs as well. As the show ended that night, Amy received one final text message from Peter Wilson. "From a whispered truth to a worldwide movement in just 1 month. Never underestimate the power of one person willing to speak up." Amy smiled. She couldn't have said it better herself.